Hey, and welcome back to Lesson 3, Embody Your Truth. Last episode, we talked about allowance and the importance of allowing ourselves to have the experiences that we need to have, to feel the feelings that we need to feel. And today, we're going to be building off of that because we need allowance to let go of judgment. Judgment is going to bring up a lot in us, a lot of intense feelings, and we need to practice allowing those feelings to be, and we will notice that they're going to start to dissipate. So today we're going to be breaking down judgment of self and judgment of other, and I'm going to kind of bring it back and show you guys that it really is one and the same thing. What we're judging in others is what we're actually judging in ourselves as well. So the concept of judgment and self-rejection. So focusing on ourselves. So really one of the biggest barriers to stepping into our authenticity is going to be shame, right? And shame is a judgment of self. So when we have these experiences of ourselves and we judge them, we immediately put our so to speak, shadows and the aspects of ourselves that we don't like back into that closet that I was speaking of. And we put the lock on and we throw the key away and we're like, those things are never going to come out. I don't want them to show their ugly head, right? So one of the biggest healings that and teachings that we need to learn is to start to, again, allow those things to be seen, allow those things to be felt, thought, and through with allowance. And we start to notice that suddenly there isn't this crazy tension around them anymore. The body starts to practice that allowance that we spoke about in the last video, and we start to judge ourselves less. Okay, but what I want to teach you guys is how we can do this work and be guided to do this work and know the little sweet spots to get inside of ourselves through relationships and through connections with other people. Because some of the greatest teachers that I've had in my life are people that have triggered the shit out of me. And the reason why is because I've had the courage in myself to dive into that. Okay, what is it about this person that's triggering me? Why? Become curious, right? Lead with curiosity instead of judgment. And that's going to be a very important aspect of doing this work. So when we lead with curiosity, we start to see that the triggers that we're experiencing from other people, there's a treasure in that trigger. And the treasure is more self-awareness. And the key to your own healing and your own self-acceptance lies in those triggers, okay? Because if we don't have the awareness of the things that we reject about ourselves, we can get it very quickly by focusing on the triggers that people incite in us, right? So when somebody triggers us, we have the opportunity to cast judgment on them and project and displace, I call it displacement of that energy, and we put it all on them. But we would not be triggered if there wasn't some sort of emotional debris in us being stirred up by this person. Okay, so we need to look at what is it about this person and this experience that's creating discomfort for me and triggering me, and what can I do about that? Okay, I have two quotes here. The first one from Hermann Hesse. If you hate a person, you hate something in him that is part yourself. What isn't part ourselves doesn't disturb us. Right? I love this because if there is an emotional response, there is an emotion attached to it. Right? Always. If somebody says to me, "Oh, you look like a pumpkin," I'm not going to be triggered by that because I don't think I look like a pumpkin. But if somebody says you look like a hairy mongrel or a homeless person, I might get triggered by that because there might be a part of me that feels like I look like a homeless person with a big old bushy beard, right? So if there's an emotional response, there's an emotion attached to it. It's just a law. You have to understand that, right? And the second one is by Carl Jung. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And this is the treasure, my friends. This is the treasure, and we cannot become more authentic if we don't have a solid understanding of self-awareness of who we are and what makes us tick and what triggers us, because we can start to work with that stuff and use those treasures to build our big, beautiful castle of who we want to become, okay? So every relationship that we have is mirroring back to us. Okay, there's not one relationship that isn't mirroring back to us, because a relationship is about somebody coming up into your experience and reflecting back to you what you're reflecting to them, right? And there's no more deeper, intimate relationship that's going to do that than a relationship with a partner, an intimate relationship, because they know the ins and outs of who you are. They know what makes you triggered, and they can actually take your triggers and they can really set them on fire, right? Some people that just trigger us, they might not even know they trigger us. And we don't want them to know they trigger us because we don't want them to have that power over us, right? But in an intimate relationship, they know these things. They push the buttons if it comes down to it, and that can really become very, very painful, okay? So we want to make sure we do this work, because the trigger is going to be one of the preventions of us getting into our authenticity, because if we're always just identifying with the trigger and not the treasure, then we are just always going to be blaming others. And true authenticity happens when we start to take self-responsibility and own our triggers, right? What somebody triggers in us is ours. It's not about them. If somebody says or does something that is unaligned to who you are, it's not about them, it's about you. And it's about showing you how far or close you are to your own authenticity, right? And in authentic work, whenever a big trigger for people when they're trying to move towards being more authentic and ridding themselves of shame is when you see other people who are living their truth and who have done this work, right? Because they are doing what you wish you could be doing, and that could incite envy or jealousy. And it's important to understand that these experiences that you're having, when you allow yourself to experience that envy or jealousy as this is something that I'm moving my way towards, I'm just not quite there yet, but just trust that you're moving your way towards it. That alone is going to be enough to help let you release it, as opposed to saying, here's this person, they're here, and I haven't even started my journey. The fact alone that you're grappling with your trigger says that you've started your journey and you're well along your way on your journey. If you're actually able to take the trigger that you have and look at it and say, what can I learn from this trigger, right? The question that I use to ask myself whenever I'm having this experience is, what is this person trying to teach me to accept within myself, right? Because when we don't have a strong foundation of self-acceptance, people are going to trigger that in us. They're going to trigger the things that we don't like about ourselves, our unresolved shadows, right? So think about the closet, right? We have the closet, we have the key locked away, thrown away, boom. But suddenly somebody says something about us, about our shadows, and suddenly that door creaks open a little bit and that little shadow peeks itself out, and that is very uncomfortable for us, right? So the key to this work is going to be to open your closet door and just start to see all these things that you're rejecting about yourself and judging about yourself, and start to embrace them, right? And this work isn't going to be going from self-animosity to self-love. It's not about that, right? It's about self-animosity to self-acceptance, to self-ownership, to self-responsibility, to self-love, right? We're kind of moving on a continuum of making our way towards that, because people always say, well, how can I just love the fact that I'm fat or I'm gay or I'm all these things, right? We don't just do that. We don't just wake up one day and have love for those things. It takes time, and it takes practice, and it takes patience, and it takes love and acceptance and experiences and triggers and all of these sorts of things. They all accumulate, right? And they all become but nothing is going to be more powerful than self-awareness, because that awareness that, okay, this is something that I don't like about myself, and I'm wanting to create an intention that I want to love it more, that alone is sending out a big vibrational frequency into the world that this is something that I want to do. And you're going to attract experiences into your life that are going to help you do that. Right? So self-awareness is going to be always foundational to any change. So we want to make sure that we're as aware of ourselves as possible, and the awareness can come by sitting with the trigger and saying, what is this about? Right? What do I need to work with here that's got me in such a tizzy? Very important. So I said the back door to self-acceptance is to accept others, right? When we let go of judgment of others, we are energetically letting go of judgment of self. Okay, when we let go of judgment of others, we are energetically letting go of judgment of self. Very, very crucial, because if we're taking that energy that we are judging outside, it's displaced. It's actually aimed at us, but we're sending it towards somebody else. When we send it towards somebody else, we're sending it to ourselves just as much, right? So as you start to do the self-love work and the self-acceptance work, you're going to notice you're going to stop judging others as much. You're going to start accepting people more. You're going to start to practice unconditional love for people more, because you're no longer having to measure yourself up and your lack of acceptance for yourself up against other people in the form of projection or displacement. Okay? So the skill to practice is going to be to ask yourself always, whenever, if you're scrolling through Facebook or Instagram or whatever, that's an easy place to do this work, because something can trigger you, and it tends to be a lighter trigger, right? Because it's not right in front of us, it's not directed at us, but somebody doing something or saying something could trigger you. Sit with yourself, pause, take a deep breath, and say, what is this person trying to teach me to accept within myself? Just ask yourself that question, and then just pause in stillness and see what comes up. And you're going to notice you're going to be guided towards something that you have split from. I call them splits. Our splits become our shadows, right? When we say that, I don't like this about myself, I split from it. I reject it, I split from it, it becomes a shadow, I shove it in the closet, it stays there until I'm ready to deal with it. And we cannot become more authentic and aligned to our truth and embody our truth until we deal with what is in our closet, okay? So the skill is going to be, again, ask yourself, what is this person trying to teach me to accept within myself? And just to understand that when somebody triggers you, instead of pushing it away and making it about them, find the reason why they trigger you and look for the split within yourself. Okay? Treasure in your trigger is going to liberate you, I promise you. And the affirmation for today, again, hand on your heart, take a deep breath, and say, the people that trigger me are my greatest teachers and liberators to a more authentic me. You're giving people permission to be as they are, right? And that's going to give you permission to be as you are. Quote from the book today. So this is actually a story that I wrote in my book about a coworker that I had. So the question I wrote to myself, I always do that, and I did this a lot in my book where I write a question to myself and then I answer it below. So how can we begin to shift our view on pain and suffering to reduce the resistance we have to experiencing it? Pain and suffering being the trigger, right? When we're triggered, we feel pain and suffering. When we put up a wall of resistance to experiencing something, that thing tends to persist in our life until we resolve our distaste for it through acceptance. When I was in my 20s, I had a coworker that I didn't get along with. She irritated the heck out of me, and because I wasn't at a place in my life to take self-responsibility for my triggers, I made it all about her and how terrible she was. I had so much resistance to this woman, and the universe must have been giving me what I needed, not what I wanted, because I was put on the same shift as her and she became my team lead for almost a year. Turns out this woman was a lot like me, and we shared similar core wounds. I was picking up in her what I had yet to resolve within myself. When we resist something, it definitely persists, and that was one of my first tastes of this spiritual law. Since then, I began to work with what made me uncomfortable as a way to heal some of my core wounds. And for example, the core wound there was control, right? I used control a lot in my life to try and not experience things like disappointment or allow people to see my shame. And it was very much the same for her. So once I was able to practice self-responsibility, it wasn't until later in life I was able to do that. I was able to look back on that and be like, wow, like I have so much compassion and empathy for her because she was in that same struggle as me. We share this, we're bonded by this struggle, right? And instead of causing separation and division between her and I in our struggle, I was able to come together in this union of we're all on this journey of the human experience through suffering and through teaching, and we're all really just walking each other home. And sometimes we're walking each other home through love, and sometimes we're walking each other home through fear and through our triggers. But either way, we're going to get home to ourselves, right? That's the key in this teaching today. Sending you guys lots of love. Looking forward to seeing you for lesson 4. Have a beautiful day.